Despite its name, the Vietnam War is not confined to the territory of North or South Vietnam. As the US and North Vietnamese escalate operations, the war crosses, but this doesn't last long. By the late 1950s, several factions share power in the Laotian capital of Vientiane. Despite its name, the Vietnam War is not confined to the territory of North or South Vietnam. As the US and North Vietnamese escalate operations, the war crosses borders, merges with neighboring conflicts, and takes on different forms, from CIA-directed secret armies in Laos to genocide in Cambodia. The former French colonies of Laos and Cambodia see some anti-French resistance in the 1950s, but not on the scale of Vietnam. The 1954 Geneva Accords proclaimed the former colonies as neutral, independent states free from foreign military interference, but this doesn't last long. By the late 1950s, several factions share power in the Laotian capital of Vientiane. Prime Minister Prince Suvarnabhumi heads a neutralist faction, while his half-brother Prince Supanupong leads a leftist faction, including the Communist Lao People's Party, or Pathet Lao. Prince Boon a cousin of the other princes, controls a right-wing faction. In 1959, rightist repression of the Pathet Lao results in a rural insurgency. In 1960, neutralist leaders purge the government of rightists and offer concessions to the Pathet Lao. But on December 4th, rightist General Phumi Nosawan launches a coup with US military assistance and captures Vientiane after a 3-day artillery barrage. The neutralists and Pathet Lao evacuate with the help of Soviet aircraft. However, the rightist Royal Lao Army is corrupt and inept and loses ground to the Pathet Lao and neutralists, especially in the Plain of Jars, a flat area where road networks converge. Initially, the US is more concerned with the crisis in Laos than Vietnam. President Dwight D. Eisenhower allows covert military training of the Laotian army as well as economic aid, more per capita than any other country at the time. In 1961, President Kennedy inherits the commitment and explains to voters the role Laos plays in the growing tensions in Vietnam.
In this military advance, the local communist forces, known as the Pathet Lao, have had increasing support and direction from outside. Soviet planes, I regret to say, have been conspicuous in a large-scale airlift into the battle area. Over 1,000 sorties since last December 13th, plus a whole supporting set of combat specialists, mainly from communist North Vietnam, and heavier weapons have been provided from outside, all with a clear object of destroying by military action the agreed neutrality of Laos.
The failure of the CIA-directed April 1961 invasion of Cuba makes Kennedy skeptical of CIA abilities, but he also rules out conventional support for Laos. So he expands the CIA's program of training and resupply. To avoid violating the Geneva Accords, military personnel are officially civilians, including pilots for Air America, the CIA's covert airline. But CIA operatives like Bill Lair are unhappy with the Lao Army, as one National Security Council staffer complains. We discovered the Laotians were not Turks. They would not stand up and fight. So the CIA looks to allies elsewhere. Neighboring Thailand is strongly anti-communist and provides bases and special forces to support US operations. Together, they also look for allies among different ethnic groups in Laos, especially the Highland Hmong. Ethnically and culturally distinct from the lowland Lao, the Hmong are fiercely independent. Although they're not very interested in ideological struggles, they do worry about Vietnamese encroachment on their territory. The US identifies Major General Vang Pao, the only Hmong commander in the Laotian army, as a reliable partner and starts training Hmong fighters in secret. One of the first is Mua Tao. We walked by foot for 3 days to reach Padang, and 2 airplanes came in and dropped the guns and ammunition. They issued the guns, ammunition, hand grenades, and 57mm recoilless cannons. We received 3 days quick training. Those guns were new for Hmong people, so we needed to learn how to keep them, learn how to operate and clean them in 3 days. In their first clashes with the Pathet Lao, who are now supported by North Vietnam, the Hmong lose their base at Padang in June 1961. However, the CIA are impressed with their fighting spirit. The agency ups its target to train 10,000 fighters in the so-called Armée clandestine, the secret army, to contain the Pathet Lao in the Plain of Jars. The Pathet Lao, though, continue to advance. In April 1962, Nosawan loses his political base at Nam Ta, and with it, US confidence. Meanwhile, the Hmong establish a new base at Long Tieng. With Nosawan politically weakened, an international treaty forms a fragile coalition of all Laotian factions and orders all foreign military to leave. The Soviet Union does step back, but the North Vietnamese ignore the request. The US moves its agents to Thailand and continues covert support from there. In 1963, the Laotian coalition falls apart and fighting resumes. This time, the Pathet Lao fight their former allies in the neutralist faction. As the Laotian government increasingly relies on the Hmong and CIA support, the Pathet Lao become dependent on North Vietnam. By 1964, the Laotian Civil War is firmly connected to the Vietnam conflict. North Vietnam establishes a logistical highway to South Vietnam, the Ho Chi Minh Trail, through much of Laos, with a major base at Chip Hon. With the US military getting more involved in Vietnam, they hope the Hmong and others can tie up North Vietnamese forces and interrupt the trail. Bombing becomes vitally important to government forces. Initially, Thai and Laotian pilots in upgun T-28 trainers provide close air support, but soon US pilots are flying Laotian marked aircraft. Prince Suwana is concerned bombing undermines his sovereignty, but the US pressures him to accept. By December 1964, US command formalizes bombing in Laos as Operation Barrel Roll. American forward air observers, known as Ravens, arrive, and the Air Force targets the Plain of Jars with 2 missions a week in 1964, but 140 a week by 1966. The Plain of Jars becomes one of the most intensely bombed locations in history. Despite the scale of US bombing in Laos, it's officially secret, as is the Americans fighting on the ground. As the US shifts its focus to Vietnam, combat in Laos falls into a seasonal cycle. The Hmong, using airlifts, make gains in the wet season, while the Pathet Lao and North Vietnamese advance on the roads in the dry season. The CIA tries to turn the Hmong into a more offensive, conventional force, but internal disagreements and the personalities of influential operatives slow progress. One controversial agent, Anthony Poshepny, becomes known for collecting Pathet Lao ears. I used to collect ears, you know. I had a big green reinforced cellophane bag as you walked up my steps. I'd tell my people to put them in and send them to Vientiane with the report. Sent them only once or twice, and then the goddamn office girls were sick for a week. Putrid when they opened up the envelope, you know. Ear collecting is soon discontinued. Despite air support, the Laotian government still suffers on the ground. Rampant corruption inflates troop numbers, while some commanders sell US equipment to Burmese opium cartels and take up drug running themselves. The CIA doesn't do much about it, and the opium often reaches US troops in Vietnam. By 1968, the Pathet Lao and NVA are on the offensive, seizing Nam Bac and overrunning a secret US radar base at Phu Pa Tri. When President Johnson ends the bombing of North Vietnam in late 1968, he compensates by more bombing in Laos, including with B-52 bombers. The scale of such bombing is hard to hide, and by 1969 the secret is out. The new US President, Richard Nixon, defends US actions, but also announces his intention to withdraw from Vietnam. Hmong forces therefore go on the offensive to win a decisive victory before the US leaves the region. In late summer, supported by massive US bombing, they capture the Plain of Jars. By February 1970, though, the Pathet Lao recapture the plains. Meanwhile, conventional offensives are draining Hmong manpower, so Thailand sends troops to help. South Vietnam also operates across the border in 1971, but fails to cut the Ho Chi Minh Trail or help the Hmong. By late 1971, Vang Pao's Hmong army is breaking apart. It has suffered 3,300 killed in the last 2 years and is starting to rely on teenage recruits. US bombing prevents a Pathet Lao victory in 1972, and following the 1973 Paris Accords, the war in Laos officially ends with the war in Vietnam. Unlike in Vietnam, major fighting does stop as a new coalition government, including the Pathet Lao, take over. However, the North Vietnamese continue to attack the Hmong, who no longer have US support. We helped the United States for 14 years. Now, they were leaving us without looking back. We didn't know when the communists came what they were going to do to us. Are they going to kill us, or are they going to put us in re-education camps?